Welcome everyone to another chess video. In this video, I'm going to teach you a couple middle game principles, and those having to do about pawns, these lovely little marching soldiers that are on the 2nd and 7th ranks of the board. So let's set up the first position that I want to teach you guys about. There will be two very bad principles about pawns, those being doubled pawns and island pawns, or pawn islands, or isolated pawns, or whatever. And then in the future video, I'll teach you two good pawn uh, shapes, pawn structures. Pawn structures, two very important pawn structures that are good and healthy for your pawns, but these two are not. These are ones to look out for and to not do. So, the position goes e4, e5, knight f3, attacking the pawn, and then defending the pawn nicely. Nothing bad about this yet. And then bishop b5, an aggressive move called the Ruy Lopez opening. And then we have a6, so attacking the bishop, the Morphy defense, and then instead of backing up, we immediately take the knight. For example, there are lines where you back up and then you play b5, and then that's called the Carol variation. But we can move to b3 then after that, and then keep pressure on f7 and other stuff. But that's not what this video is all about. This is about doubled pawns. So after here, instead of doing that, we take, and then we have one of the pawns takes. Because we want to trade the pieces. So now we see that the pawns are doubled. There's a pawn stacked on top of another pawn, c6 and c7. And the reason why this is bad, it's not super bad like checkmate, but it's bad because they can't defend each other. Say, for example, we continue the game and they start marching, and we want to attack them, whereas pawns here, they can defend each other. This one defends that one. For example, if we push this, it's defended by these two pawns, but these pawns can never defend each other, because this pawn used to be, actually that pawn used to be over there, this pawn used to be over there. Okay, they can never defend each other because they'll simply be marching down in an endless square closer and closer to suicide, in which on the next move, when for example, you develop a knight, and that's not very good place to develop a knight. Then they push, and then you can't have a pawn like here, for example, to defend the pawn, which would have been the pawn that was over here, but the pawn now is under threat by the queen, and then we just take, and that's why doubled pawns are not good at all. So let's back that up, and let's look at another position. Here we have white to move, take the pawn, and now we're doubled. We have doubled pawns. In this position, though, don't worry about this, and all this stuff. It's just to make the game more realistic. Here we have the doubled pawns. When they want to start marching up the board, they will be slaughtered, because we will, for example, bring the rook here, and then there's no saving them except if we do this. But then if we do that, then we lose the bishop. But forget about the other pieces. Just focus on the doubled pawns and what I'm trying to say. For example, once these pawns want to start marching, we attack there. We can't defend this pawn by any means, because just take the position as a random position that could happen, but it has to do with double pawns. So we can't take the pawn because, we can't take the pawn. We can't defend the pawn because we lose the piece. Even if we try to attack the rook, we'd still take. So the pawns cannot defend each other. If the pawn had stayed there, then if we had an attacked pawn, say this didn't exist, say we attacked here, if this pawn were here, then it would be defended by that pawn. Pretend this pawn is just an imaginary pawn ghost, and that's not actually there. Okay, so as we see, the doubled pawns are not very good. Now let's go look at isolated pawns, or pawn islands, or island pawns. Okay, so let's back this up to the very beginning. There we go. And let's look at this. Here we see all of these pawns are pawn islands. No pawn defends them. Here, the king does defend d3 and f2, which are the pawns that can be defended. So here, these pawns, this pawn is not defended by another pawn. This pawn is not defended by another pawn. If there were a pawn here, these pawns can march happily. If there was a pawn here, they could start marching happily, defending each other, and then get to the end of the board and turn into a queen, and all the checkmates that they want to do could probably be accomplished. But since they're not defending each other, they have to rush the king over and then start helping the king get all the way here and bring the pawns down. That's why isolated pawns are pawn islands, pawns that are not defended by anything. If they're defended by a different piece, like a piece defending a pawn, then it's still a pawn island, because there's no other pawn defending it. Do we really want to have a piece defending a pawn? We want to have the pawns defending the pieces, because we want to have the pawns defending the pieces. Sorry, we don't want to have the pieces defending the pawns. If we have the pieces defending the pawns, then that's all they're going to be doing, while the opponent's pieces are simply going to be rushing at you. So we want to have the pawns, the pawns protecting the pieces, and the pawns also protecting each other to be able to march up the board and promote. So isolated pawns, not good. In the essence, though, without all these kings and all the other pawns, isolated pawns just look like this. Because then we just go like this. And this position is basically a draw because there's no pawns, and it's not even a position because there's no queen, because there's no king. So then we march up, and then we stop the pawn, and then they must turn it into something, and then we take. So sorry, that was really strange, but what I meant to say is this is an isolated pawn that's not defended by anything. If it's defended by another piece, it's still an isolated pawn. But here, if the pawn is not able to be defended by another pawn, then it is a isolated pawn, or a pawn island. So let's retrace our steps and review again our doubled pawns. So let's get into the Ruy Lopez. Okay. Stop. Okay, so let's just back that up. We have the double pawns that if they want to start marching, they'll be slaughtered by any piece that really wants to take. Never mind that knight. If the knight moves here and moves here, that's just a blunder. Okay, so anyways, what we see here is the doubled pawns, not very good. Here, taking the pawn, not very good. Although in some positions, you of course will be forced to take the pawn. Here, you could, for example, advance it one and just continue on the game from there. And then you can defend the bishop instead of taking it. But yes, so that's what we learned about double pawns. Double pawns cannot defend themselves. That's the purpose of why double pawns are not good. Then we have isolated pawns, in which the pawns are not defended by any other pawn. They have to be helped by a piece to promote, which is in very simple winning endgames not that bad if that's what you have to do. But pawns defending other pawns are going to be far easier to promote, unless of course you have like a king and pawn versus king endgame, in which you're going to have to help get your king in front, and that's for a different video. Okay, so and lastly, those are the two funny little isolated pawns. That this isn't even a real position. Just saying there's no king and nothing. So yes, those are isolated pawns. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I also hope you guys like the new color. I've changed the chessboard color and the chessboard pieces just to add a little more flair. And yes, that's all we're gonna have for today. We have those isolated pawns and we have the double pawns. So great, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and that was our Metal Games video. We'll see you next week. Bye.